Oh, you can only truck through 3.5 feet of snow for so long. It's a lot of work. Alright, so when I go backpacking, I usually start by looking for a place that I can realistically get to that has a lot of down trees or down wood, and it's not overly wet. There's some sort of high ground, something like that, and not a huge amount of wind exposure. And so I'm risking that a little bit today. I have fields, if you can see through the woods out there. Fields, swamp out that way, and then actually there's a swamp behind me this way. We have a really strong north wind for a while, and then tonight it's going to taper off. But I did find a place with a lot of truly dried down wood. And I was going to do a scenario where I would use this blade, you know, what if I forget my saw kind of thing. You know what, I actually did forget my saw. I forgot it at home. I took it out just to process a lot of wood, but I forgot it. So I'll just be burning logs in half and using my blade to harvest them in the first place. So the blade is, you know, relatively unmodified other than the edge. The scales are pretty much the same, how they come from the factory. I haven't done a whole lot there, I just have Kydex sheath for it. So this is what I'll be using to process a couple logs, kind of like this one here. Nice Widowmaker right where I'm going to set up my tent. Alright, so the amount of time to get through this one probably 6-inch diameter log of oak was about 10 minutes. So it took a while. I mean, that's with a saw, I suppose it'd be 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Just to get that thing enough to push it over, you know, and with a knife, man, it takes a long time. So if you're one of those guys who's like, I'm going out with just a knife and that's all I need. In the winter time at least, I'm going to say that's probably baloney, and you would get very tired very quickly unless you got lucky. And you'd have to get very lucky to find a big tipped over dried oak tree to burn the whole thing. When you're talking about, you know, with the wind chill around 0 degrees, you just don't get very far with just a knife unless you get kind of lucky. I really do have the opinion that you probably want an axe or a saw with you. Could you do it? Yeah, you could probably do it. I don't have a whole lot of extra saws and that kind of thing that I have in my emergency packs anyways, but I do carry a saw in those packs just because of examples like this. It's just so much harder with a knife. You know, that whole nut and fancy brigade where everything's done with a knife, that really died off for a reason, because people found out even a good blade, it's just not enough. Alright, what I'm doing right now is I'm going to use this little stump here to make myself a cross batoning stick, you know. Really a baton itself. And the reason for that is I found that this blade just doesn't have enough length and heft and a weight forward balance to be exclusively a chopper. It's really great with stuff that's like thumb size, green woods, it does really well. I guess up to wrist size it does pretty well. Like this tree that I originally cut down with it did pretty well. But when you get to that bigger stuff, there's just too much resistance. The handles are not ergonomic. It does wear on you a little bit because you're using a knife. The grind that I have is kind of a convex Scandivex maybe, and so it does the best of what I can find. Just not enough power in there, so I figured I'll cross baton this big tree that I found over there. It's kind of split in half. I can kind of get an angle on it. I just need something like this made out of oak to get in there. Kydex sheath, R. Bagwell on eBay. This is a really good Kydex sheath that he's put together. Originally I thought it was a little too tight, kind of like I said in my previous Enzo review. This one not so much. Actually it fits really well. It's perfect. If you have modified scales, I think you would have some tightness right in here. You'd probably have to heat it up a little bit and change it. But with the regular stock scales, this is really good. Great hardware, good fit and finish all around, and kind of a newer generation tech lock I think that it's on there. And then I threw on a fire steel loop. We'll test that fire steel out on this blade in a little bit. blades of about this size, what I prefer to use is the knee method. You can still draw it like a normal knife if you're going to get feather sticks. I just don't find that to have as good of control as using the knee method, so kind of just brace it against your knee and just draw the knife until you kind of clear a spot on the wood that's consistent grain, and it gives you a good amount of control. You can feel the wood pretty well, and it doesn't take long before you start producing much higher quality feathers with bigger blades. This is more true with like a 9-inch blade. This size blade, it still works, you know, depending how big your knee is. If you're a real big guy, there's not a lot of blade left over there, but I just kind of angle things a little bit, and it gives me at least workable feathers like that. And you can go way finer than what I'm doing now. What I'm doing now is functional because I know the temperature is going to drop here another 15-20 degrees, and so I'm not wasting time. I'm getting my wood together, enough fire to get me through the night at least. I'll probably have to collect a little more in the morning, but that's not so bad. One of the reasons I really like down jackets, actual down jackets, is because they usually come with some sort of little carrying device, and they're really easy to actually fold back up into the bag. They're compact, and as long as you have a waterproof outer shell, they're pretty fail-proof. You know, I think the main thing you want to look out for is getting rips on stuff. Catching them on twigs, that does happen. I have some duct tape on this one because of that. And then also flames. Not good for flames. But if you have some sort of outer shell, even I don't know, cotton outer shell or something, it'll kind of protect you from most of that stuff. But for a jacket that's technically rated for 35 degrees, it really adds a lot to my sleep system. It's quite comfortable. In fact, it was so warm last night well, it wasn't warm. It was 0 degrees with the wind chill, but it was so warm in my tent under my sleeping bag that I didn't even need this. And the whole thing compacts down, you know, small enough to fit inside my boreal shirt here, or just in my pack. That's really convenient. That's one of the reasons I like down. Found some poplar here that is extremely dry. I don't think it's overly dry though. Probably not. This would make really good material for a fireboard. It's a little curvy, maybe a little more than I would want for a fireboard, but see how fibrous this stuff can be. It can be really good for making your fireboard. Not so much for my spindle, although I know some people use poplar on poplar and it works for them. I don't have a lot of success with that in doing bow drills. That kind of Scandivex grind that I put on this blade really does a nice job of biting into the wood. much, much better than the factory grind. The factory grind is, you know, I don't know. I don't know what it's good for, honestly. Generally, when I put an edge on a knife, I look at what I'm going to use it for. I don't do the same grind every time. And with this particular grind, I wanted kind of a convex grind. I wanted the strength behind the edge. But I also knew that in woodworking and material removal, you want a thinner edge, so it's kind of a Scandivex. It's just a micro Scandivex. There's not a lot there. If I was going to truly Scandi the blade, it'd be a lot of work on the probably on a belt sander first, and then the work sharp. Just be a lot of work. And I would have to start somewhere up here to go with the 17-degree edge. And then you're just going to lose a lot of the strength that the blade does have, because this is a really strong knife. It does very well. I do like it, you know, even with those flat handle skills. It does feel good in the hand. There's a lot that you can do with it. It's kind of the, you know, beater knife for me. It's not really a master of anything. I still like it quite a bit. Aesthetically, it's a pretty cool knife. One thing I like to know is that whether a knife can spark rocks or not. I do a little bit with chert or flint or mica and char cloth. And so I don't think I've ever tried on this Ontario. So I have a few different rocks with me, and you know, typically I would go right to the flint, but I've got a really nice sharp piece of quartz here. And quartz does a pretty good job on most of them, especially if it's sharp like this. It breaks apart fast. It's kind of like fool's gold. If you ever used fool's gold for sparking off knives, you know, it breaks apart fast, but it produces a nice spark. That's a solid no. This particular model does not spark off that. I would know by now. I'm pretty good at assessing the sparks, and I kind of know what I'm doing when it comes to sparking off steel. It would do it by now. So I'm going to say no, this one doesn't spark off rocks. That's not a big deal to me. Usually I have a fire steel with the blade, you know, in the sheath. I carry an actual Swedish fire steel with a striker, just in case this spine dulls out a little bit. Yeah, it doesn't spark off the rocks. Not going to be using it for that. That's okay. That's really not a big deal. In my fire kit itself, I carry an Opinel number, what is it? Number 6 maybe? I think it's a number 6. Yeah, Opinel number 6. It's a real thin blade stock. It's a tiny knife, but it works really well in my fire kit because it does spark, and it'll give me enough on a big stone like this to actually hit that char cloth. And sometimes punky wood. If you char up some punky wood, that does work. It's a lot tougher though than char cloth is. That's kind of how I carry my fire kit. A couple things I can touch on real quick. The handle skills, again, yes, they are flat. I'm probably being redundant at this point, but I apologize. I have to record multiple times because of the weather. It kills my camera really quickly. The scales are flat. There's not contouring there. I think one thing I will go ahead and do is just to hit it on the sander, and even if it's thinning the scale out a little bit, there's enough broadness here for large size hands. It would just be nice to have a little contouring rather than just that flat kind of abrupt curve. It's better than sharp angles, like Tops has a lot of sharp angles on their knives. I really don't like Tops because of that reason. With this one, if I could just round it all the more, it would really help the knife out. My hand is a little sore from chopping. Yesterday I did a lot of chopping, more chopping than I've done in years probably. And yeah, it's not great on the hand. I probably could use a better lanyard too. I kind of use this as a pinky lanyard. Got it with some other knife. Yeah, it didn't do the best. But I'll tell you what, with between the factory edge and convexing an edge like this, or kind of Scandivex, this performs probably 5 times as effectively. It's much better. One modification I did do is take that jimping out of there. I hate jimping, and when you choke up on the blade like I do, if you have bigger hands and you want good control, you're doing feather sticks, that jimping is right where it shouldn't be. You know, people hold like this and it just digs in, eats away at your thumb. So that's the spot I use for striking a fire steel, as you can tell. And then also when I choke up like this, that's what I want. You know, if I could have my druthers, I would have no choil altogether, and I would just have the blade go all the way back, right up to here. I know a lot of people don't like that. That's the way I prefer it though, because then I don't have to choke up where there isn't handle space. It's less comfortable there. I would rather have a blade with an edge that goes all the way back. Lots of people don't like that though, for sharpening reasons or this or that. It's just the way I would like it. I don't prefer guards on knives either. I'm not doing a bunch of stabbing and penetration tests. I know some channels that's like what they're dedicated to, but I don't really need to. And when I do stab into things, typically I can put my thumb in the lanyard and it kind of helps resist if I have to go through something. I just don't do that much stabbing, I guess. I do a lot more cutting, slicing, choppy, that kind of stuff when I'm out backpacking. Really appreciate the blade though. This is kind of my favorite. I've had the RD4s, I've had the RD6, I've had the RD9, I've had a Night Stalker, I've had plenty of the Ontario line, and I had sold them all. The only one I regret selling was that Ontario Afghan. That was a really unique blade. It's very broad, came to a nice thin point, and I had Scandivex that edge as well. It's just a cool blade. I'm not much for collecting, but I probably would have kept that one just because of the way it looked. It was pretty cool, functioned, you know, kind of neat. This though is the best in-betweener. That's why it's so popular. That's why it's kind of persisted when the other ones did not. Is this blade is the best in between. You still get a lot of length, but it's not, you know, the extra 2 inches. That's that'd be out here at the end of my finger. That extra 2 inches, it makes a blade kind of unwieldy. The balance is a little different. This blade's balance point is still handle heavy because of that micarta. So it's quite a bit of blade hanging out there. And that micarta balances it out, kind of makes it heavy, but it's right about that first finger position, so it's even, it's level for me. I think most people, a blade like this, the most you should expect out of it is probably light chopping, like really light chopping, and you know, some batoning, that kind of thing, if you have to split wood for getting to dry firewood, which I had to do multiple times on this trip. Not something you're going to whittle with forever. You know, if I grab a piece of wood, if I want to make a notch, which I'll go ahead and do, there's definitely better knives for the task. This kind of material is a little softer, so it's going to be more effective, but as far as ergonomics go, smaller knives are just more manageable in creating a notch. I end up having a lot of blade hanging over, which is just a little risky. If you're backpacking, you don't want to take extra risks with a blade getting cut or sliced. Smaller knives are just more manageable for that. You're not going to see guys whittling, at least in the States, primarily using big blades. I've seen some guys in China do it, but really, that's an art. This is more of a master of none, but user friendly to most people's task. You know, if you're just slicing or cutting up meat, you're opening things, woods blades, just chopping down small, you know, thumb-sized branches, clearing the ground, messing around with a knife like I am at a campsite, this is a really good blade. I will say the sheath that it comes with is, I don't know. If you're just going to store it in a trunk or something and then pull it out and use it, that's probably fine. But if you're actually going to wear the knife around, I think I can go ahead and recommend this from R. Bagwell on eBay. This has been a good sheath. It got really, really cold last night. Sometimes it's when Kydex sucks because it gets so cold that it doesn't work or doesn't release the blade. This is the perfect fit. Did really well. I appreciate the I don't think it's actually Tech-Lock. I can't remember who makes this, but it's the button release kind. This is much more user-friendly than the old Tech-Locks were. The aftermarket fire steel is just something I made. I took a piece of Kydex, rolled it up, and put a
fire steel holder on here, some hardware. That's pretty necessary for me. I always like to have some way to start fire. And then I would recommend a lanyard. Other than that, I really appreciate the knife. I think it's a pretty good deal. If you can get it, you know, let's say sub 50 bucks, this is still very relevant. If you're going to spend more than that, I'm going to say there's newer blades with better handle ergonomics. There's stuff out there now that even has better steel. It's up to you. If you don't mess around with knives a lot and you go out in the woods just sometimes, something like this is going to be fine. You're not going to care. If you're the guy who has to have the best stuff, this isn't the best stuff. It's definitely not that. But it's cool, it's functional, it's affordable, and that's why it fits into a review that I'm willing to do. It's not super pricey, it's not the most premium, it's not overpriced. It's pretty much common man, materials, common man affordability. I like it. That's the Ontario Rat 7. I don't know how many times backpacking I have forgotten a spoon, out of all things to forget. Got the food, forgot the spoon. But this knife does an okay job. You know, if it was the RD9 that I used to carry years ago, even this task, it's just kind of unwieldy. You have so much blade hanging out there, that extra 2 inches makes it kind of tough to make just a little spoon. It's a good thing I have birch everywhere. Fallen, fresh birch. Birch tends to have a natural antiseptic property to it. So making spoons out of it, I always go heat them up and go burn them. I don't have a spoon knife with me, a bowl knife. So I kind of have to just rely on the old dip method here. But birch bark is definitely the go-to wood for that. You got to be careful about what you put in your mouth when it comes to woods. A lot of people don't know that, but like buckthorn, it's an invasive species. I would not use buckthorn. Buckthorn's skin is toxic, actually. And so it's everywhere, and people think, oh, I'll just carve that out. Not a good idea. Aside from that, it's really hard wood. No, birch bark, like a birch bark spoon, that kind of works for a few meals, as long as your food's not really hot. And birch wood, something like this, is kind of the go-to for me. It's soft, it's easy to work with. It actually has a good taste, believe it or not. Birch wood has good taste, high water content, and as soon as you just kind of purify it, some fire and flame and smoke, it's really good to go, and it won't make you sick. But at least something like this knife has the agility and dexterity to get in there and do that kind of work without being too big or unwieldy. This wouldn't be a camping video if it wasn't filled with just needless feather sticks constantly, I'm sure. Here's the advantage of the Scandivex grind. If you kind of know what you're doing with the Scandivex, you can make some pretty spectacular feathers for feather sticks. I think Dave Canterbury says a minimum of 3 curls per strand, or 3 turns per strand. So when you get 6 or 7, you're doing pretty solid. So what I'm doing here, guys, is I'm planting the back of the blade against my knee. I'm angling it a little bit up like this, and that angle just keeps it real consistent, and then I draw the wood back. You can still do it by pushing the knife through the wood, and in fact, for some people, it's more sensitive to do it that way. They get better curls that way. For me, I tend to kind of skip over parts, and it gets a little choppy. So I like the knee method. If I'm going to make a crazy feather stick, I go with this method. I personally like to make 15, something like that, of these, and I make them right away when I first get to camp. And that way I have some for when I first start a fire, and then that night, in case I get the chills or something, I need to wake up and stoke the fire, I have some feather sticks real quick. And I don't have a lighter or anything like that with me. I just have a fire steel. So I like to have good quality feather sticks waiting around. And then a little bit of birch bark. I'm in a birch wonderland right now. It's nothing but birch trees all over the place in that direction. And so I'm pretty good to go in that way, but I like to have these just as a backup. I definitely have woken up in the middle of the night and realized I'm really, like, my feet are sort of wet. Maybe I sweat in the beginning, I get cold, or condensation is getting really bad, and so it's good to have a way to get a fire started real quick and have the materials ready. I pretty much never go to sleep anymore without having an extra fire ready to go on the side, just because of the last couple years of whoopses. But the blade definitely does a nice job.